main contribution of some of my friends on the other side of the aisle have made in the fight against ISIL is to criticize this administration and me for not using the phrase radical Islam. What exactly would it change? Would it make ISIL less committed to trying to kill Americans? Not once has an advisor of mine said, man, if we really use that phrase, we're going to turn this whole thing around. So there's no magic to the phrase radical Islam. It's a political talking point. It's not a strategy.
President Obama, passionate in his defense of not using terms radical Islamic terrorists. This is a new Fox News poll out tonight. Asked the question, has the Obama administration made America stronger or weaker? And you can see the results. Although better from earlier, June 2014, still weaker at 49 to 40%. Let's bring in our panel. We welcome Monica Crowley, editor and columnist for The Washington Times, Jeffrey Goldberg, national correspondent for The Atlantic, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Okay, Monica, you heard the president's speech today. Thoughts?
Well, that phrase that he used, that there's no magic to the phrase radical Islam, really struck me, because if he really believes there's no magic to it, why doesn't he just use the phrase? You cannot hope to defeat an enemy unless and until you're able to define it. That's just step number one. That is the bare minimum. And this president refuses to not just delineate who the enemy is and what we're up against here in all of its parameters, but he also refuses to engage it. So his steadfast refusal to name the enemy then leads into this lack of a coherent strategy that we've seen from the president from the very beginning. Interesting,
Jeffrey, that he said it today, a day after Hillary Clinton, the presumptive Democratic nominee, said, you know, she doesn't have a problem saying it. She just doesn't want the implication that the U.S. is at war with Islam.
Right, right. Well, you know, I use as my guide on this, not the president, not Hillary Clinton. I talk to people in CENTCOM, which has the responsibility for the Middle East, the military's responsibility for the Middle East, intelligence people, and they say they would prefer not to broaden the subject. And what they mean by that is they would rather not have a situation in which Muslims who are on our side feel as if we're talking negatively about their religion, and that is where I think that's where the guidance is coming from Obama. He has the predisposition not to use the term anyway, but I think he's hearing, as he said, he's hearing from his own intelligence experts and military experts, you know what, there's no reason to go out there and do this if there's a chance that we could alienate people who we need to actually defeat ISIS with.
Even with the word before, radical. In other words,
people hear what they, the fear is that they hear not radical, not violent, but Islam. And I differ with Monica a little bit. I don't know what it would necessarily do. I think we have a pretty clear understanding that ISIS is a radical organization that derives its principles from a particular reading of Islam and kills a lot of people, including a lot of Muslims, based on that. I'm not sure how much more clarity we would have.
Charles.
Look, the fact that the president goes way out of his way for 7.5 years to avoid the phrase that is obviously the most descriptive of the enemy, radical Islam, means he's doing it for a purpose. He pretends and says, well, if it's a magical phrase, people who are arguing against him are saying, I think the president said, calling it a threat by a different name doesn't make it go away. Of course it doesn't. Nobody implies it does. But deliberately calling it by something meaningless. Violent extremism is a completely empty phrase. No one has ever strapped on a suicide vest in the name of extremism. Nobody dies in the name of extremism. Obama is deliberately trying to deny or to hide or to disguise the connection between all of these disparate acts and groups, and if you want to mobilize a country behind you, you need to tell them who the enemy is, why it's doing what it is. FDR did not say the day after Pearl Harbor, yesterday, a day which will live in infamy, we were attacked by the violent extremists.
FDR was battling the Japanese high command and the emperor, and he understood that he could bring about the defeat of Japan by convincing the Japanese high command and the emperor to admit defeat, right? I mean, here you have a population of a billion.
After Pearl Harbor?
No, I'm talking about I'm talking about the war effort. I mean, there's no equating what's going on here, where you have a civilizational struggle within Islam. You have some Muslims who want to kill us and some Muslims who want to kill ISIS. And what he's trying to do, I think, is get on the side of the Muslims who want to defeat
let me just
ISIS,
interrupt for 1 second.
including our friendly governments in the Gulf states, as you well
Graham
know.
Wood from The Atlantic, who wrote a very detailed piece about ISIS, wrote this: the reality is that the Islamic State is Islamic, very Islamic, and went into the reasons why and why that's important.
Right.
It was a pretty well-received piece.
No, it was a very excellent piece. I mean, it's one thing, of course, this is what the president, I think, is trying to say. It's one thing to acknowledge this. It's another thing for the president of the United States to risk alienating friendly governments, friendly Muslim governments that are doing all of the fighting for us, or much of the fighting for us, when they say, please don't invoke Islam in this struggle.
Look, the fact that we are still having this conversation after all of these years after 9/11 is absurd, outrageous, and dangerous. We're talking about semantics here and the language, and of course the language is important, but frankly, I wouldn't care if the president referred to the enemy in terms of rainbows and puppies if he had a coherent strategy and was actively engaging this enemy. He does not do that because he's got an ideologically allergic reaction to linking Islam with terrorism and with any kind of serious military engagement in the Middle East. Therefore, those two things are linked. If he makes that connection, then he's going to have to pursue more aggressive policy in the Middle East, and he has never been prepared to do that.
Quickly, I got to go to a break.
I just want to say that I agree with you, Jeffrey, that this is an intra-civilizational war in Islam, which is precisely why the phrase radical Islam is the correct one, because what it does is identify the split. There's the radical Islam, there's the non-radical Islam, and that, I think, states the case exactly as you would present it.
I will say that the King of Jordan, when I went over there, said that they are not religious warriors, they are thugs, they're thieves, they are dash, and he used those terms. That's exactly what the president said today. It is a battle over semantics, and the question is what's happening on the ground.